Hi everyone, my name is Gabriel and this is the Hour of the Raven, your channel for everything Ravenloft, RPG, Dungeons and Dragons, and horror.
Today, we will explore the past and secrets of Althea, the cursed Medusa who roams the endless labyrinths of Demise as its Darklord. Before we begin, a few clarifications. Today, we will explore the domain of Demise, and we will expand our reference sources to address this domain. Our exploration through the mists in the core domains of Ravenloft generally cover domains that had already been featured in novels, adventures, and especially in the Ravenloft Gazetteers, books that provide detailed information about the domain and their Dark Lords. Up until now, I have been careful to present Ravenloft in my videos using official sources. However, in the case of the Demise and other domains not previously covered by the Ravenloft Gazetteers, I intend to expand on the sources of information. The domain of the Demise first appeared in the Monstrous Compendium Volume 2 and received a brief mention in the book Domains of Dread. The domain would be covered in one of the 3rd edition Gazetteers, focused on the domains of the Sea of Sorrows, but unfortunately, White Wolf's license to release books for the setting came to an end, and these books were not written. The Ravenloft fan community wouldn't let the setting rot in oblivion. The Fraternity of Shadow website, the most well-known and organized site for fans of the setting, has published netbooks that continue the Gazetteer's proposal, exploring in-depth the domains of dread. Some of these books explore the Nocturnal Sea, the domains of Soreng, or the cluster of Zerisha, for example, and for some time now they are developing a gazetteer for the Sea of Sorrows. Although the Sea of Sorrows gazetteer is not yet finalized, some of its passages describing domains have already been previewed by their authors in the Court of the Raven netbooks. In the video description, I will leave the link where you can download it. The next videos about the Demise will be based on the official material and the article about the domain written by Ron Lauffer. The article on the Demise was published as a preview of the Sea of Sorrows Gazetteer, and it's possible that the final text will change when the Gazetteer is finally published. Are you ready? To escape the horrors of Markovia, we stow away on a ship. After being discovered, we are forced to jump into the sea to escape and swim to the island of Demise. Stranded on the island and with no chance of escape, we are guided by a strange fairy to a previously inhabited cave on the island. Inside, we find records of its former inhabitant, Captain Werner, a survivor of the Dorma Orama shipwreck and of the island's history and horrors. Our studies are interrupted by the arrival of a blind old man, and Captain Werner invites us to his campfire, where he shares sinister tales of the island with us. The conversation is interrupted by a woman's beautiful and melancholic song, which seems to emanate from the depths of the earth and throughout the island. For a moment, we are hypnotized, and we rise to leave the cave when an icy touch paralyzes our arm. Werner grips us with all his strength, but we realize his nails and fingers are penetrating our flesh, and we are standing before a ghost of the old captain. The cave that until recently seemed like a refuge reveals itself as a long-abandoned lair, and even the food we ate is nothing more than dust remains of a long-rotted meal. We are overcome by horror and intense cold, but Werner does not release us, telling us that he will not allow us to suffer the same fate of his crew. Paralyzed, we hear his spectral voice whisper about the true horror of Demise, the Lady of the Labyrinth.
Hour of the Raven.
Hear my lament and come to me. Behold my beauty and ease my loneliness in the endless halls of my prison and labyrinth. True strength emerges from suffering, and that is why I am so powerful. Althea, the Darklord of Demise, is a Medusa with extraordinary powers, but a prisoner in her labyrinth. The character was first introduced along with the domain of Demise in the supplement Monstrous Compendium Volume 2 as a unique monster and Darklord of Demise, a small domain of dread inspired by Greek mythology and classic antiquity. The character was not given a detailed backstory in official supplements, which only presented her statistics and hinted at the curse and motivation. However, the character backstory was developed in great detail in the Court of the Raven article, published as a preview of Demise's exploration for the Gazetteer of the Sea of Sorrows. The character's inspiration comes from Greek mythology and its tragedies. In Greek mythology, one version of Medusa was a beautiful woman cursed by jealous gods, with snake-like hair and a petrifying gaze. This tragic monster was confronted and beheaded by the hero Perseus. The character Althea brings to her story the tragedy and horror of Greek mythology, but also takes into account the lore and mythology of the Medusa race created for the Dungeons & Dragons setting. Like most Medusae, Althea's body is that of a beautiful woman, wrapped in robes evocative of antiquity, but her head, instead of hair, bears deadly vipers. Her face, however, is even more sinister than that of her kind, with her skin partially covered by scales of a reptile, and her eyes completely black. Her mouth is a lipless slit, through which her forked tongue slides in and out to sense odors in the air. Althea is a vengeful and spiteful creature, and her isolation in the labyrinth of Demise has driven her insane. She is tormented by memories and traumas from the past, intrusive thoughts, and an obsession with motherhood. Her madness and cruelty only makes her more dangerous and unpredictable to those unfortunate enough to cross her path. Althea's black eyes are weak in bright light, but she is guided by a keen sense of smell. Her petrifying gaze is her most dangerous power, capable of turning to stone even creatures on the border ethereal, petrifying their spiritual bodies. Althea is vulnerable to her own petrifying gaze and avoids mirrors or any reflective material. When her petrifying gaze is not enough in combat, she is also a skilled archer and possesses a beautiful ornate short sword. The serpents on her head are also capable of beating those who approach, injecting deadly poison, and can even spit venom at their victims that can blind when in contact with the eyes. She also can use a siren's song, and when she laments the pains of her past, her song echoes throughout the island, luring the unwary into her labyrinth. Althea is unaware of the hypnotic nature of her singing. The dark powers have cursed Althea, and she is not only imprisoned in her domain, but also unable to leave the maze, where she falls victim to the illusions of a mysterious captor. She is also cursed to never achieve her greatest obsession, to produce offspring with one of the unwary who occasionally enters the labyrinth. She is not sterile, but somehow her attempts always fail, due to the curse from the dark powers. Althea is unable to close the borders of her domain. But what led this Medusa to become the Darklord of Demise? What crimes and sins led a Medusa to attract the attention of the dark powers? Althea was born in an unknown world, lost in the mist of time, a place shrouded in legend and myth, where mythical creatures that in the land of the mist would be considered monstrous were far more common. Although Althea is perhaps the only Medusa lurking in the demiplane of dread, she once lived in a society of her race and was cursed by the dark powers for violating the taboos and precepts of the Medusae. Those who hope to unravel the secrets of Althea's tragic past and sins must first understand the habits of the Medusae society and the complex reproductive cycle of the species. Whatever gods, curses, or mystical accidents created these creatures has imposed the Medusa race a complex reproductive cycle. Although Medusas are always female, they have a male counterpart, the Maedar. These rare specimens have muscular, tattooed humanoid bodies and are devoid of any hair in their bodies. Completely immune to the petrification, the Maedar have the reverse gift of being able to transform stone into flesh with their touch. Medusas can reproduce with normal humans and with Maedar. Whenever they successfully reproduce with humans, they lay eggs from which new Medusas always emerge. When Medusas manage to find one of the rare Maedar and mate with one of their own kind, the eggs usually hatch into human children, whose fate is instant petrification upon catching sight of their mother's eyes. Only a small percentage of these offspring hatch from their eggs as new Maedar, which explain the rarity of encountering the male counterparts of the Medusa. Medusas are the dominant majority among their species, but their society has always revered the Maedar. Relationships between Medusas and Maedar are monogamous and lifelong, and there are no greater prestige and achievement for Medusa society than finding a Maedar mate. Even with the enormous chance of having countless doomed human children, such couples have the chance to bring another Maedar into the world, and thus ensure the survival of both genders of their race. As a young woman, Althea had always championed the superiority of the Medusas and despised the Maedar and the reverence that her culture placed on their male counterparts. Although she had always longed to be a mother, she considered herself superior to the Maedar and valued her independence. However, when she reached marriageable age, she attracted the attention of the Maedar Stelios, who made a formal marriage proposal. Althea did not desire the marriage, but eventually yielded to the pressures of her society, which viewed her situation with envy and considered it unthinkable to refuse such proposal. The awkwardness of their coexistence was eased by Stelios, who also did not fit the mold, being an intellectual and user of arcane arts, and an expert mage in the school of illusion. Gradually, he managed to win the heart of Althea, and their coexistence smoothed over the Medusa's rough edges and initial resistance. It wasn't long before she soon had an egg and a child on the way. Althea's longing for motherhood dashed when the egg hatched, and a human child soon stared at the eyes of his mother and turned into stone. Heartbroken and eager to hold her child in her arms, she begged Stelios to use his gifts to de-petrify the child, but Stelios was unfazed by the situation. Medusa and Maida culture despised humans, who are inferior creatures used only for reproduction, as food or as slaves. He refused to bring the human child back to life, claiming it would be an affront to Medusa culture and a waste of time. He consoled her, however, by saying that they would soon have another child, a true Maida. However, attempt after attempt resulted in human babies who were instantly killed by their mother's gaze. Stelios rationally argued that this was to be expected and refused to heed Althea's plans to bring her human offspring back from petrification. Although Althea had always despised humanity, she yearned to fulfill her desire to be a mother, regardless of her child's species. However, with each child petrified after birth, Althea's frustration grew, leading her to lose her sanity and develop a deep hatred for Stelios. When they had another child and she laid another egg, she decided to flee from the Medusa society and took her egg with her, taking refuge in the remote caves of a dormant volcano. There, she began wearing a veil that covered her eyes and waited for the egg to hatch, completely blindfolded, so as not to put the child at risk. Stelios, already suspicious of Althea's behavior, found her in her new refuge. Fearing to exacerbate her insanity, he did not interfere with her foolish attempt to care for the human baby completely blindfolded. As Stelios expected, one day the child pulled off his mother's veil and was petrified. Stelios tried to calm Althea and make her see the futility of her attempt to raise a human child. She insisted that now that they lived isolated from their Medusa society, he could depetrify the child, but he refused. Unreconciled, but following the traditions of their relationship of pure monogamous devotion, they remained together in the caves of the dormant volcano. After a while, Althea had another egg. Just before the egg hatched, she donned the veil again. As soon as another human child began to emerge from the egg, she prepared to commit a terrible act and used her fingers to blind the newborn child. She injured the boy's eyes, but the child's screams attracted a group of adventurers to the site who were exploring the caves in search of the monsters that had taken up residence there. Seeing the horror of the scene, they engaged in combat. Caught off guard and blindfolded, Althea was wounded in combat by the adventurers, but Stelios came to her rescue and managed to pull her out and escape with Althea, leaving the blind human child behind with the adventurers. They took the child away from the caves, and later even managed to heal the child's blindness. Althea could not forgive Stelios for abandoning the blind child to his enemies, and her hatred for Stelios grew even more. In her obsession with motherhood, she was tired of having mortal children, and, breaking all the taboos and precepts of Medusa culture, she decided to betray her partner with a mortal, so she could have a daughter who could also be a Medusa. The shrewd Stelios already imagined that Althea would be willing to perform such acts, and using a delusion, he posed as a human exploring the caves. Althea carefully covered her eyes to approach the mortal and attempted to seduce him, but when everything went as planned, Stelios revealed himself, exposing Althea's betrayal. Stelios rebuked her for this act of disloyalty, but following his cultural traditions, he reaffirmed that they were each other's only partners for all life. Althea was overcome with murderous rage, but knowing her husband's power, she decided to deceive him. Pretending to be convinced of his reasons, she returned with him to his home and even lay with him one last time. When he slept peacefully beside her, she shot an arrow at point-blank range into his throat. Stelio was dying when she readied a new arrow to complete the assassination. Using the Maidar's gift, however, he touched the stone floor with his hand, sending his soul far from his body until he found a large gem deep within the earth. His Maidar body was murdered, but Stelio's soul survived, becoming a Glyptar, a spirit trapped in a large gem that can shape the rocks around it. As punishment for his murderous wife, he used his rock-shaping power to transform the caves around them into a vast labyrinth, and using his gift as an illusionist, he hid the exits, making it impossible to find escape. Althea became his prisoner, but he fed her by bringing her fruits from the jungles in the caldera, which fell to the soil and descended to the labyrinth through his rock manipulation. The Medusa did not know that Stelios was alive, and believed the labyrinth to be a curse from the gods because she broke the dogmas and traditions of her race and murdered her husband. To the surprise of Althea and Stelios, on the last night they spent together, in which Althea had already planned his murder, they conceived, and Althea laid another egg with a child. The improbable happened, and finally the child that emerged was a Maidar, whom she named Lefteris. The Maidar child could have been Althea's redemption, a means of fulfilling her greatest desire for motherhood. However, she found no joy in the child, and seemed overcome by profound sadness and depression. Lefteris reminded her of Stelios, for whom her hatred was so deep and ingrained, and her madness was driven to its limit. She then decided to murder Lefteris, and drew her bow to shoot him with an arrow. As the arrow was released, Stelios, watching all, made the stone embrace the child and remove him from his mother's presence. Stelios was not the only one observing the infanticide, and the dark powers enveloped the entire island and labyrinth with mists, condemning Althea to become the Dark Lady of Demise. Althea does not know what happened to Lefteris, and believes he was not swallowed with her by the mists that further isolated her labyrinth. In her madness, she continues to wander the endless corridors, unaware that the soul of Stelios, her hated husband, shapes the rocks and walls of this labyrinth, and creates illusions to deceive those who explore its corridors. Althea's loneliness and madness drive her to frequently visit the stone nursery, where cradles still hold the petrified forms of her former children. There, she carries the stone children in her arms and sings them mournful and melancholic lullabies. The Dark Powers has bestowed upon her song the gift of a siren song, and it echoes throughout the island. Countless sailors has been lured to shipwrecks, bewitched by this song. Those on the island quickly find themselves drawn to the song, and only free themselves from this compulsion when it's too late and they are already prisoners of the maze. Althea still longs to escape her solitude and have a child. When prisoners enter her labyrinth, she begins to stalk and hunt them, eliminating them one by one with her petrifying gaze. Or failing that, with poisoned arrows and blows from her sword. She always chooses one of the men who remains as her consort. The victims will have to be blinded by the Medusa, and then seduced or coerced into becoming her mate, even if only for a short time, before also meeting a tragic end, likely devoured by Althea. On several occasions, she came close to her goal, but the dark powers cursed her to never achieve what she desired most, and all manner of tragedy and bad luck befell her companions and eggs before she could hold a child in her arms again. Interestingly, fate placed one of Althea's children in her path, the baby she blinded on her homeworld, but who was taken from her by adventurers, became the mage Omega. Cured of his blindness by the adventurers, he became obsessed with his origins and consulted an oracle for answers. His search led him to the crater of a dormant, mist-filled volcano, where he was engulfed by the mists and brought to Demise. No one knows the fate of Omega, but the fact that his grimoire was found on the island by explorers likely indicates a tragic end. Could Omega have entered the labyrinth in search of his origins, only to be murdered by his mother? Is he now one of the statues in her labyrinth? Or worse, could he have been chosen by Althea as a partner before being destroyed? There is another secret unknown to Althea. In distinct stone halls, separated from Althea's labyrinth, Stelios kept and raised Lefteris. Stelios manifests Lefteris only through the runes on the walls, but he has done everything he can to make the child understand the depravity of his mother's crimes and to train him in the arts of illusion, so he can assume the role of guardian of the maze. Lefteris hates both his parents and longs to be freed of the marital drama and hatred that permeates their relationship. He is deeply curious about the world and secretly considers leaving Demise. Captain Werner's spectral clutches finally releases, and the horror of his tale still echoes in our minds. Althea's sad song has already ended, and we run away from the cave and the ghost that haunts it. When we catch our breath, we see daybreak in the disturbingly silent jungle of the caldera. We are startled, however, by the sound of footsteps in the woods. A man walks through the jungle, seemingly heading toward the labyrinth's entrance. From his clothing, equipment, and appearance, we identify Astor Minar, the fraud who presents himself as a great sculptor in demonry, but presents petrified victims of Althea as his masterpieces. Without a second thought, we attempt to trace the route taken by the deceiver. As expected, after crossing the rocky desolation, we spotted a small vessel anchored near the island. If the account of Werner's ghost is true, Astor deserves no sympathy or compassion, and we didn't hesitate to carefully descend the cliffs to steal the small boat that had brought him to Demise. Our navigational skills are poor, but we ventured into the Sea of Sorrows, where even experienced sailors can get lost in the ocean's mists. With a vague sense of direction, and knowing that Lamordia was nearby, we continue our journey. For some time, we sail the seas, but luck is not on our side. Icy winds buffet the vessel, and with very low visibility, we crash into a huge iceberg hidden by the snowstorm. The vessel sinks in the icy sea, while we are close enough to swim to a frozen land, likely the Isle of Agony in Lamordia. Join us, turn on notification, and let's explore the domain of Lamordia.